For our first activity, we're going to experiment with or get some practice with how to apply different layers of paint to this canvas surface. Some layers are painted at the beginning of the painting, others later on in the painting. Uh, some layers are thinner layers, some layer a little thicker. So we need to become sensitive to what we're trying to do every time we lay down brush strokes or paint onto the surface. So the first thing we're going to do is mix up some color. Actually, we'll just use black and white, so we're not complicating this with colors and so forth. So I'll put white on one side and black on the other. And the next step is to grab my palette knife. And I want to mix just a middle gray. So I'll take some white first because the black is very intense. And if I just take some black here and mix it in, I'll mix up a middle gray. Like so. Okay, so I have a middle gray mixed up. The next thing I'm going to do is just draw some shapes, just simple shapes. These first shapes, they'll be kind of somewhat uh, rectilineal, like here. Just experiment with how to fill these shapes in with a layer of paint. So the first sort of thing we want to work with is the idea of scumbling or using a drier paint to kind of fill in the area. And the reason for this sort of paint layer is, let's say we're doing an alla prima painting and we're going to just paint all the way through to the beginning to end. Well, the first layers, we don't want them really full of medium or very liquid, because if we paint into them, the paint we paint into them is going to disperse and we won't be able to get some nice brush strokes because it's all going to blend together. So here, if we want to keep the paint drier, so we'll get some paint, but if I just take paint right out of the tube like this, I'm going to get what's called a dry brush. I could fill that all in like that, but it first of all, it's going to put wear and tear on your brush to kind of scrumble in like that. So I would want it a little bit more liquid. Oh, I have to put some thinner in my solvent, using a low odor solvent, Gamsol. Just take a little bit, put it in here, so it's a little more brushable. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so it's still a little hard to, because now it's starting to work a little better. Okay, so okay, so now you can see the paint is still a little bit dry. Well, it's not dry, but it takes me a little bit more to push the paint around. Okay, now this is fine. I did the edges. I'm not that concerned with, but it will leave a more rough edge like that. But the idea is that this paint is fairly dry. So now we'll go and we'll do the next one. Just a little bit of thinner. And just filling that in by scumbling, kind of pushing the paint around. Okay, it's a little drier. Now, I can also do this with a medium. And if I wanted this to dry faster, like dry by tomorrow, for a day, I can take this Galkid gel medium It's a medium, but it's a gel. It's also a drying gel. Also, Liquin is another brand that you can do this with, or you can actually use a liquid medium that has a drying agent. I like the gel because I can kind of control a little bit more how much I'm putting in there. A little bit more than if it was just liquid, but the liquid works fine too. I've used all of them. Now I'm going to take this, actually I'll kind of scrape this off, put it over here. So I'm going back to that original paint here, the mixed paint, and I'll bring this gel into it, just a little bit of the gel, and I can do the same thing, kind of a thin layer. And just fill in that area. Once again, I don't like, I want it liquid enough so I'm not pushing against my brush, because that's really going to roughen the bristles, and then you lose the shape of the brush. Okay, so this is sort of a scumbling technique to kind of push the paint around. The paint's a little drier, but it allows the paint, this layer of paint is going to be a little drier feel. So if I go back into this and I use a paint, I mix a paint and put more medium in it, and it's much more what's it called fat, or it's more, has more body to it. I can paint strokes over this and keep going in the painting. Okay, the next thing we want to do is work with the idea of actually a very thin layer of paint. And this is for basically kind of toning the canvas. Okay. And so here we use a lot of, much more of the solvent. Now, the more solvent you use, it's going to break down the paint. So we'd only do this if we want to get a very thin layer. And I can also just, I can also wipe this down. So sometimes artists will put this in and then wipe it down just to tone the canvas. But it's not good to break down your paint too much with just the solvent, because it removes the oil in the paint. So you want it thin, okay? But it's just a very thin layer. Like that. Now, with weather, cold weather, this actually will take a while to dry. Sometimes it's not even dry by the next day. So usually if you're going to put this as an underlayer, you can maybe wipe it down, and then you can go paint on it, because it's such a thin layer that the next layer of paint is not going to really affect it too much. It's pretty stable. Okay, now we want to get now to our paint load and paint strokes that are going to go on top of these underlayers, so that you can actually see the stroke. And we'll do that later as we kind of use this to build painting as we go along here. I think what I'm going to do is go to a new page here, and I'm going to redraw these shapes. Now I'm just doing it like that because most time when you're painting, you've got some irregular shapes. Sometimes they're kind of squarish, sometimes they're much more organic and round feeling. Okay, and I'm gonna maybe I'll just paint up, mix up a little more paint here. And so that's one thing you do have to be working with, is that as you're painting, if you start using up all your paint, and all you got left is just a little bit around here and there. If you're trying to paint bold strokes, you won't have enough paint to do that. So you've got to going back and mixing your color in order to keep the paint have more body to the paint and be able to make really definite, deliberate strokes as you go. Okay, now we're going to assume that we're painting over. We can actually paint right on a white canvas this way, or we can paint over other layers that are thinner, like these. So you'd have a more scumbled, thinner layer, and you're going to paint into it, or you could have a much thinner layer of paint. And they call it imprimatura, which is the basis, kind of toning the canvas. It's just laying in a very medium value, and then you paint into it, or you can kind of scumble some paint underneath, and then paint on top of that. But this paint, if you do that, you want this paint a little drier, a little thinner. So the next step is to come, and we're going to now deliberately make strong strokes here, or mix our paint so that we have a lot of paint on our brush, so we can make some deliberate 2 inch long, so to speak, strokes, or even to 3, something like that. Depends on what size you're painting, and that's relative to the size of the area you're painting, and the canvas size and the size of your brush. So you can imagine if you have a big brush and you're painting big canvas and you want to paint these larger stroke areas, you're going to need to have more paint. So in this case, I'm going to take the medium, add it to the paint, and I want to get this paint so I can feel it's dragging here. So although this would give me a little bit, see, that's pretty nice little small stroke like that. I might add a little bit more medium, and theoretically you don't want to add too much because it's going to actually make the paint more transparent, but it takes a little while before that would happen. Okay, so now I've added the medium so you can feel that the paint moves around. And then when I want to make some definite strokes here, and when I do these sort of strokes, I want to see the stroke, and we're just layering stroke on each other. I'm not thinking of blending at all, okay? We're just layering on top of each other. Okay, so like a shape like this, you want to think about making 1, 2, 3, maybe roughly 4 strokes, 4 to 5 or 4. It depends on the size of the shape, of course. Okay, I get a little more paint in here, maybe a little more medium, and I come down and I'm trying to paint this shape. Whoops. Yeah. So that's about 5 strokes, like that. And just painting the shape. Notice the edges. I'm not trying to paint this like a coloring book. I'm going up to the edge like that. If you were to do that, all you're trying to do now is make extremely hard edges everywhere. And in a painting, you generally don't want that. You want to have edges from soft edges to harder edges to disappearing edges, that sort of thing. So this is another reason why we usually start off a little looser in our painting, because we don't want to go around and make everything a hard edge shape. So here, see how much I can get that whole stroke in there by adding this medium. See, even then I get a little dry brush at the end. Okay, so it's very deliberate strokes to paint those shapes. Now, if I went back into this area, let's say, and I wanted to paint over, now this is still wet, see? But if I wanted to paint over that and fill that in better, if I get enough medium and so forth here, I can come and paint over that. So now I have if you look up closely, I have the thinner layer on the bottom, and then I have these thicker strokes. So that would, you could, work with that idea, or you could fill it all in. So if I come across, now I'm painting roughly the same color, but let's say I wanted to lighten the color, put a little variation, then I'm coming over there. So I could paint over that. And use this beginning, you're using the beginning to kind of get the values correct. And let's say I take this and I want to change values. I lighten the value a little bit. Bring some of this paint in, lighten the value, add a little medium. Okay, so you can see how you get this thinner layer underneath and then you're painting over with the darker layer. So let's go back to this one. And we want to do the same thing here. We'll do it with organic shapes. A little more medium. Once again, you've got to be recharging your palette if you need more paint or mix more paint or if you need more medium. Okay, now this is a little different. I'm going to have to use my brush to turn the brush to paint these edges. With the more geometric or rectilinear shapes, it's more like straight strokes. With the organic shapes, you're going to be twisting the brush a little bit more. Once again, I'm not trying to paint this like a coloring book. I'm trying to come in and use my brush to paint in the shape, figuring how to use the brush to do this. So you notice I don't have this little teeny brush where I'm just trying to fill in. I'm trying to use big strokes to figure out how to paint that shape like that. Okay, so you can get the feel. I've got to have enough paint in my brush. It's got to be loaded if I want to paint this sort of stroke. Okay, it's not scumbling, it's not imprimatura, it's like more definite strokes. And eventually we'll use that to paint strokes in areas, and we want to be able to come in and make a mark, make a stroke, and leave it. And we're painting over an underlayer, possibly, or we're just painting right on the white canvas, depending on the painting style